Hi, everyone. It's Mandy. Before we go into it, patrons, you are everything. Thank you so much for being supporters of the show, supporters of the Restorative Grief platform everywhere it's found. Because I've been doing this for a while now, but I tell you, running with others makes it so much more enjoyable. So if you're interested in all the premium content, exclusive interviews coming up, or even just supporting the methods and the work because you know it makes an impact in your life and in others, then we would love to have you join us. Check out the show notes for links, and that's it. Let's get into it. Welcome back to Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. You are listening to episode 55, titled A Bizarre Thing to Go Through with Phil Drysdale. Over the last decade or so, Phil Drysdale has become a thought leader in the world of deconstruction, but not because he's offering clarity or answers. To his point, as you'll hear, there are no deconstruction churches, organizations, or leaders that you can join on a Sunday morning, but Phil did create a deconstruction community online for people to find one another in person. Anyone who has experienced a shift in their beliefs will tell you that grief is intimately intertwined with a changing faith. So today's conversation is about how we can continue to find growth, meaning, and connection as we move away from black and white thinking into a practice of integration. How do we bring the best parts of our past selves into the present in pursuit of who we are becoming? This is a bit of a long episode, but I guarantee it's worth every minute. Well, hello, Phil Drysdale. How are you today? Welcome to Restorative Grief.
I'm great. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. I have followed your work for years. I think I mentioned to you at one point that I have been sending people your way because of your beautiful series on spiral dynamics and the way you just open it all up for people because it's a very useful tool. But that's not all that you do. You've got the deconstruction network that you've created for people who are going through a change in their faith practices and the Phil Drysdale show. So why don't you just give us a little snapshot for someone who might not be familiar with your work about yourself a little bit more?
Sure, yeah. So I've been in this space probably for about a decade now, well, helping people that are going through the process of shifting away from their faith tradition, whatever that might look like. And so it does look really varied. I think a lot of people have a very black and white picture of what it looks like to do that. But it really is one of the most diverse kind of movements in the world, because moving away from one thing doesn't mean that everyone ends up in the same place. So it's kind of a bit like herding cats in a sense, except I have no desire to herd anyone. I have no desire to direct anyone particularly. But yeah, for about 10 years, I've just been sitting with people and saying, yeah, sure, I'll sit with you while you figure this out. And that's what it's really looked like. In the midst of that, I've started the Deconstruction Network, which is a website that helps people find other people that are deconstructing their faith in the local area, because there's a lot of online spaces for people to connect, and that's amazing. And honestly, it's probably what's carried the vast majority of us through this process of losing faith, changing faith, evolving faith, whatever it is, having other people to connect with, hearing what's going on in your head on an Instagram post and going, oh my gosh, it's not just me. Those kind of things are huge, but they don't really replace sitting down, having a drink, laughing, crying, hugging, just sitting with someone that gets it. That's a huge thing. And I think most of us that have come out of that place of having some very strong faith tradition have grown up with that. We've grown up with people all around us who want to be with us, who want to support us, who want to hear what's going on, who want to offer prayer and support and companionship. And suddenly overnight that disappears. It makes the process even harder that we don't have someone to process with and share. And so the idea behind the Deconstruction network initially was just a map on the internet that you could put a dot on your map and that'd be you, and people could click it and send you a message, and it was anonymous. But once you got to know a few people in your area, you're like, okay, this guy seems legit, I'll meet him for a coffee, and hopefully they don't murder you or something.
Right.
I've not heard of anyone that's been murdered
So far. No one murdered has come back and complained.
It should be a tagline: Deconstruction Network, no one murdered so far. But we do actually get messages constantly. I get picture messages and things like that, people that are out having coffee with someone they met and saying, I've made like a best friend and it's the best thing that's ever happened. So it's really meaningful and exciting to see stuff like that. But from that, I've always been interested in data and statistics and things like that. And so from that, I thought, wow, I've got this pool of thousands of people that are on a website and they all identify in this space as deconstructing. What if we asked them some questions? And what if we gathered some information and started talking about what is this experience of deconstruction actually looking like? Because generally speaking, for people that don't know, the term deconstruction is a complex term, and a lot of people have a lot of opinions. And generally speaking, the most vocal people about deconstruction are those that have no idea what the heck it is. Yeah. So the people that you tend to hear most about deconstruction from are a pastor screaming from the pulpit, or your grandma on the phone telling you that you're going to go to hell and she's terrified for you. They're people that maybe have heard a little bits or pieces here or there, or they have very vested interests in it being a certain thing, maybe to help them feel safe in their own faith or something like that. But rarely do we hear from experts that actually have looked at data, that have studied people that are deconstructing and going, actually, this is what it looks like. And so the idea there was to help give a voice to this community and help this community feel seen. Even people that are in this space that talk about deconstruction, that have deconstruction podcasts, that have deconstruction accounts, a lot of them fall into a trap of living in this little bubble. And so you'll see progressive Christians that have deconstructed, and they live in this little bubble sometimes where they think deconstruction looks like becoming a progressive Christian. And they don't know that actually that's about maybe 15 to 20% of people that deconstruct will do that, which is a big amount. And if they live in that bubble their whole life, there's still millions of people that are in that bubble. That's just fine, but it's not an accurate representation. So if you're deconstructing and you're sitting in that space and listening to that person, you're going, this isn't me. I'm utterly alone. But you don't know that there's a whole other world somewhere out there that represents you. And so we're trying to do our best to kind of represent, this is the very broad, varied experience of people that deconstruct faith. And so, yeah, do that. I post on stuff online. I chat with people. I share with people. I've got a podcast. I've not been doing much on the podcast. I'm trying to take a step back away from the day-to-day sitting with people, running podcasts, doing interviews with so many amazing people, doing wonderful interviews, wonderful podcasts, helping people on the ground. There's very few people doing research. So I'm trying to focus most of my time on research these days. And so that's where I am. But yeah, sorry, rambling around.
I love it. You're safe in the rambling world with me. And I love the work that you've done for so long, because that ability to simply sit with someone is such a gift for someone that's falling apart, whose world is crumbling around them, because we as grief supporters don't necessarily know just to keep our mouth shut and listen. To your point you made off the air, this idea that we have answers and we think we owe them to someone, or we can guide them through their deconstruction. It's so centering and obnoxious. So what is it in your time doing this that led you to recognize, oh, I have to be very quiet as I help people lead? Because I mean, unless you miraculously started out in the work doing it that way, I certainly didn't. So I'm curious if there was anything that just hit you and said, wait a minute.
Being terrible, right? I mean, that's how it works, right? You do it a certain way. I'm a loud, obnoxious, I've got ADHD, I just ramble, I monologue, I like to tell people everything and anything. I've got special interests that I know everything about, and I'll talk about them for an hour. So like, yeah, you come to me and go, oh, I don't know about this. And I'm like, I do, I can tell you everything. And you realize that people, it doesn't mean anything to that person because they weren't really asking that question. I just heard the question I wanted to speak about, or whatever it might have been, right? And so, yeah, generally speaking, how I learned to sit with people was I realized, gosh, this stuff doesn't work. It may have worked for me, and it might even work for maybe like 1 in 100 people I speak to, but it's not a very good success rate to give a single cookie cut answer to every person. Maybe you stumble across the one person in this world that's a bit like you and it works, but generally speaking, you're gonna have a very bad success rate. And that was me. I'd have people come to me and they asking questions, and my journey was my journey, and it was very unique to me. I had my own experience. What you find with deconstruction again is that everyone's deconstruction is unique. Even people that come from exactly the same faith group, even maybe exactly the same church, they had a different experience. Maybe they went through a divorce and you didn't. That's going to have impacted what their faith experience was in that church, in that denomination, in that religion. And therefore, what worked for you or the questions you had might not be the questions they had. And so I think I've started more and more learning that the more I listened, the more I could hear where people were at, and the more I might be able to actually give them something helpful to answer that. And then what I found more as I kept doing that was the answers weren't ever really required. The amount of times, because I get hundreds of messages a day, maybe hundreds a week. Some days I only get a few, but some days I get hundreds, and it is a lot. So sometimes, maybe I'm busy a day or I'm just a bit overwhelmed. So I take a couple of days off messages and I'll come back and I'll work through hundreds of messages and plowing through. And half of them are saying a second follow-up message from the message I didn't reply to 2 days ago saying, you know what, a day after I sent that, that was it. It's all I need to do was just tell someone I'm good. Don't worry about replying. Thank you so much. And I get that message all the time, which possibly speaks to how slowly I reply to people's DMs. So bear that in mind if you shoot me a DM. But it's what we need, right? I don't know. I mean, your podcast is about grief, so I imagine you have very well experienced knowledge of what it's like, and many people listen to this do. But I lost my mom years ago, 4 or 5 years ago now. I didn't need answers. I didn't need anyone to tell me what to do, how to do it, how to feel, whatever. I just kind of needed to sit. And it was really nice having people that understood that and sat with me. And it was really not nice to have other people come along and think they were sitting with me, but instead they were trying to preach to me, or they were trying to fix me, or they were trying to comfort me. But I didn't need it in the way they were offering. Maybe it might have been very comforting to someone else, but it wasn't to me. And so, yeah, I think, we all have these different experiences, but I think on the whole, it's been doing it for years and years and years. You very quickly being a loose term, probably a year or two in, I was like, okay, I really need to become a little less prescriptive in my worldview. But bit by bit, you start to realize, I don't actually, and also you don't have answers half the time, right? Let's be honest. I mean, maybe for a couple answers here and there, we have some answers that might be quite good or significant. Maybe you have a specialist interest or a degree in something, or you've studied something for years. But a lot of the time, the questions people come to you, they're so specific, so unique. Their stories are so nuanced that I've not lived your life. I don't know, but I see those emotions. I feel those emotions. I can recognize those emotions, and yeah, it sucks. And generally, that's what most people need is, yeah, that sucks.
Yeah, and it's funny how far that sucks will go too. I actually lost my mom in 2016, so it's been about 6 years for me. And I think what was really interesting in the aftermath of that horrible occurrence was watching the way, and I can say this in retrospect, watching how I witnessed my story and my addiction to black and white thinking crumbling at the same time. So and I had always been the person that was willing to say, no, there's gray space in between. Nothing is actually black and white. But then when, push comes to shove, recognizing, oh, damn, I have internalized a lot of black and white thinking. And now my faith and my framework and my structure is also crumbling right alongside this already significant loss in my life. So I've got all these secondary losses. And I imagine a lot of people who do come to deconstruction are coming off of the back of something like that. So I'm curious, how do you approach when people just supporting someone when they recognize, wait a minute, this mentality or this person I've lifted as an authority or this book that I've built my life on, there's a lot of black and white cognitive distortion here. And now I have to find a way to feel safe enough to release that. What does that look like for you as a supporter?
It's really interesting. It took me a long time to recognize this because before I was in this space, I was in a very Christian space. I was very in my own world, Christian world. I was traveling, I was speaking, I was doing conferences and college, speaking in colleges and churches and things like that. And so I had all the answers, and I went around telling people what the right answers were. And that worked really well because everyone in church wants to know what the right answer is, and they're very black and white thinking a lot of the time. Not all churches, but most fundamental churches at least. And so I was in that bubble, like, and that way of thinking was so ingrained in me that even after I deconstructed, even after I kind of had these massive shifts in my own spiritual outlook and worldview, I still would find myself giving black and white answers to life, to all sorts of things in life. And so people would come to me and they'd say, I don't know about this. I don't know about that. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? And I foolishly go, oh, this is what I think, or this is what it took me about a year and a half to recognize, oh no, I'm stopping. I'm causing people to be delayed in their process of deconstructing healthily, of growing, of evolving. Because what's happening is most people that come out of these fundamental faiths, fundamental worldviews, where we do see things in black and whites and right and wrongs and left and rights and all these dualistic ways of seeing things, we tend to look to authority figures or authority texts or a god or something to say, this is right, this is wrong, do this, do that, you'll be blessed, you'll be cursed. Very rigid kind of ways of seeing things. And when people first start to deconstruct, what often happens is their authority figures are the ones that come under fire. So people start to question the Bible or their pastor or their pope or their denomination or their God. And so they start questioning these things. But what's funny is it's rare that fundamentalistic mindset immediately disappears overnight. And so they've questioned that authority figure, but what they tend to do is look for a new one. So they might not believe the Bible when they are trying to figure out, I don't know, how old the earth is, but they will immediately latch on to something else. Oh, scientists say this. Now, I think you're probably fairly accurate to do so. But it's an example of we want to find someone else to give us this answer. Now, unfortunately, most of us aren't well-trained geologists or astrophysicists to be able to figure out how the Earth is.
Yourself, I am extremely intelligent about rocks.
There you go. I've got a friend that's really into rocks, so I mean, maybe she could. But we do this in all sorts of areas, and so what we find is people stop. Maybe I don't know. We stop listening to our pastor, but then we latch on to someone online. Maybe one of these people in a deconstructing space, maybe a progressive Christian or an atheist or something, and we latch on to them and go, they are experiencing something like I have, or they've got answers to these questions I have. And so we latch onto that person and we grab their answers and we try and make them fit. And what happens is maybe for a few people, it works really well. I genuinely think for a lot of people that happens. For some people, they deconstruct from a fundamental faith and they go straight into an atheist community and go, oh, yeah, this makes sense. It clicks. It works for me. It makes sense. Or they go into a progressive Christian, or maybe they start exploring Buddhism and Taoism and things like that. And it works. That's great. It's really great. I have no problem with that. However, it's a minority. For the vast majority of people, because there's so much scope out there and because everyone's so unique and different, they need to figure it out themselves. They need to experience a lot of things. They need to try a lot of things. They need to look at a lot of options. And so for me to be giving answers to people that were asking questions, what I found was actually I was creating stumbling blocks for them as they were moving forwards. They were stopping to try and absorb my answer when maybe it wasn't right. Maybe, again, a few people might have found it really helpful and it might have worked, and maybe that's where they are still, and it was the best thing that ever happened. But not many, I don't think. Yeah. Not too many, I don't think. So, so I think there's an obligation or a responsibility for those people that are in a space of influencing people coming out of authoritarian religions and fundamental worldviews to not feed that fundamentalism, to not feed that dualistic black and white thinking. Because if you do, they might have deconstructed from one worldview, but they actually still underlying have the same broad worldview, which is someone else can give me the answers to life and I'll just follow them. And that's a really stunted way to live your life. There's no autonomy, there's no freedom, there's no creativity, there's no self-expression in that. And that's what most people really at the core of their deconstruction need to start engaging with. They need to start experiencing their own autonomy, their own ability to figure out what they believe, what they think. And that looks like figuring out your own authority figures, right? I mean, so it's not like I said, if you're not a geologist, maybe look to a geologist to answer the question. You know, if your pastor's at the pulpit telling you to vote for someone or to not wear a mask or to not get vaccinated, if you're in the fundamental faith, that might work. You might go, well, this guy knows, he's hearing from God, I got to do what he says. As you start to deconstruct, maybe it's okay that you have autonomy and you start going, what do I think about that? Do I think a guy with a Bible degree should be giving me immunology advice? Maybe I'll look to an immunologist and ask what they think. And so it's not that you don't have authority figures in your life anymore, but it's that you, from your own place of autonomy, think about who you invest your authority, who you look to as authorities. And generally speaking, you'll be very nuanced about that. You'll have authority figures in a whole plethora of areas, because very few people know everything about anything. I know I like to think I know everything about everything, but very few people apart from me know everything about everything.
Well, it's all that data and research, Phil. That's why you have so much information and so many answers.
Yeah,
right?
it's still a very, very small niche, isn't it?
Yeah. There's so many things in what you just said that I want to chase down. One thing that right there at the end with that decision to pursue autonomy and be creative in thinking, but remaining in community is a really nuanced place to exist. And I know that over the last couple of years, my own experience within a faith community has been actually enriched quite a bit through remembering. And my husband was even the one that said, go re-listen to Phil's series on spiral dynamics, because it was the blue mentality that kept like bringing up that thought of, okay, but this is a blue environment. No wonder there's an obsession with security. No wonder there's an obsession with protecting the group. No wonder I feel like an outsider because I've gone beyond even this next level of orange. And for anyone listening, I'll put links in the show notes about with Phil's teachings and other cliff notes, because I know spiral dynamics is like, what in the world if you've never heard about it? But it was really fascinating how my anger would dissipate almost immediately. As I was able to kind of reflect really lovingly and compassionately back toward this any mindset that was jumping all over me from my perspectives and saying, oh, right, I'm not attacking you as a person, but you are perceiving that I'm attacking, number one, and two, that it is your foundation that I'm trying to crack beneath your feet. No wonder you're self-protecting. No wonder you're pushing me off. And I think that that's a really interesting thing to carry forward, even as you form a new community, whatever that looks like, because to your point about worldviews, it's also a framework that we live within. Like we have anthropologically defined groups in our midst that we belong to. And a friend of mine was talking with me a couple months ago because we were in a situation where it felt like we were recreating church. And that was spoken like, I just don't want to remake church again. And I had to say, well, hold on a minute. It's a structure that we create meaning around. So it doesn't mean we're recreating church. It means we are familiar with the structure of running an event or a group of people. How do we separate? And I guess that's a good question for you too. How do you separate when you are familiar with a way of existing in the world, but you're trying to create and be creative around bringing opportunity for autonomy and new meaning into that setting?
Yeah. It's a very difficult thing to do. I think especially, so we're talking about spiral dynamics here. It's just a model of psychological development. So we this is well documented in psychology, that we develop through stages in life and we grow. And so we're just talking about going from one stage to the next. And so you might be able to, a simple example might be going from a toddler to a young child. You might, in that gap, you start to experience empathy. You start to think more about others. You start to look to mom and dad as authorities in new ways, as separate beings from yourself, you know. So, and then you might have teenagers as a later stage where you start to question mom and dad as authorities. And so, you know, we have these stages of growth, and we're just talking about this from a more sociological, kind of broader anthropological kind of perspective. What's interesting is, generally speaking, when we look at stages of development, it's really hard for us to connect with the stages we're closest to. Mm-hmm. And so this is the hard part, right? Is that generally speaking, that teenager doesn't want to hang out with their 10-year-old brother or sister, right? Because they're just not cool. They're just young. Don't want to hang out with them, right? And so there's this component of we want to push away what we were. We push away where we came from. We try and distance from that because there's shame. There's all sorts of emotions that we have to reconcile and come to terms with that. And this is huge when we leave something like fundamental faith. A lot of us, I mean, I talk to people every day that are trying to reconcile. I was a youth leader and I taught these youth really harmful, unhealthy things about sex and their bodies and God and their lives. And how do I deal with the fact I did that for 10 years? And how many kids did I influence negatively? Like, that's hard to come to terms with, right? It's hard to come to terms with if we grew up in that, just if it just happened to us, never mind if we were part of making that happen to other people. So there's these things where we looking to the prior stages of our development, and we don't really want to connect with that part of us. And we do want to kind of reject that and because there is shame, there's embarrassment, we feel deceived, we feel we were foolish to be a part of it, or whatever it might be, or we feel like that's a stupid idea and we've got the right idea now. And there's all sorts of stuff going on there that is really hard to engage with. And so, of course, we are very cautious when we see those parts come out again. But the truth is, those are just parts of us, right? So a 7-year-old is still very capable of yelling no, just like a toddler, right? Because they learned that at that stage of being a toddler, and it was a nightmare when they were a toddler, but it's important for them to learn to say no and to have autonomy and to develop some self. And so a teenager is still capable of being empathetic. I know some parents of teenagers that are like, really? But, you know, they learned that, but it's become a part of them. And as they grow and develop, they add more components to that, but it's still a big part of them. And so in that earlier stage, this conventional stage, it's very common in fundamental faith where we look for safety and security and certainty, and we look to authority figures to find that. It's normal for us to still embrace those dynamics in our life. There's healthy ways of those being expressed. It's healthy to have some rules in your life. It's healthy to have some structure. It's healthy to create some safety, right? We all want to feel safe. I mean, it doesn't matter how far you evolve beyond church or beyond a conventional way of thinking. We all like feeling safe, right? No one wants to walk into a tiger cage or something, right? Or maybe we do. But if we felt safe, we would. Maybe it'd be great. I don't know. Seen the videos of people playing with tigers or something. I mean, that sounds great, but not a chance I'm going to do it. So these prior stages that so resonate with our past, that we maybe look down upon, that we feel shame about, we feel embarrassment, we want to reject. There's a lot in there that's good. I often give people exercises and I say, it's really easy for you to think about all the stuff that you hated about church and all of that different stuff. But why don't you sit down, get a piece of paper, and just make a list. Write down all the things you learned while you were in church. Write down all the things you learned because you were a Christian, a Muslim, a Jew, whatever it might be. Like when you were in your fundamental faith, write down the things that you learned. I learned how to be a good public speaker. I learned how to listen to people. I learned how to sit with people. I learned to connect with people more. I'm autistic, so actually it was a big part of me learning to feel more comfortable around other people, to allow people to touch me. People were hugging all the time in church, and that is not easy for me. But that actually helped me develop and grow in that way. And so there's lots of things that actually I really appreciate from that stage of my life, and I have moved forward and brought with me. Right? I don't want to stop being good at speaking in public. I think that's probably a helpful thing to bring with me. I don't want to stop embracing other people and being inclusive. Now, of course, in those prior stages of our life, we were maybe much less inclusive. But the truth is, a lot of churches, you sit down and look at a group of people in a church and you think, these people would not be friends in any other context. So in some ways, while it's only inclusive of people that believe the same thing, it's quite inclusive beyond that in other ways a lot of the time, right? So someone that might have been excluded in some sort of societal group is now very much included because they're a part of our church, because they're a part of our faith, whatever it might be. So I learned some of that. Now I want to grow. I now want to include, gosh, gay people, trans people, people of other races, maybe some of the things that my church didn't do so well. So absolutely, let's move forward. But it's not that this is a different thing. This is we're building on this. And so I think as we move forward with autonomy, we can continue to have community and we can build on those things. But it's having an awareness of what was good in that space and what wasn't, and building on what was good and correcting what wasn't. And I think that's really the key to moving forward in a healthy way. I think integrating our past self and our past identity is key to being healthy. We talk about so in psychological development, there's a window of thought regarding something like narcissism, so MPD. So narcissists, one of the main schools of thought around narcissism is that it generally comes from extreme neglect or abuse or some sort of real tragic neglect or abuse around the age of being a toddler. And basically what it means is as we were going through stages of development, we didn't get very far. We got to about toddler, and then there was so much abuse, harm, neglect that we didn't get to move to the next stages. We didn't get to at 5, 6, 7 years old, really 5 or 6, you're starting to learn empathy. We didn't get to do that now because we didn't have the right experience. And so they get stunted and they get left there. And, these people become presidents. They become powerful business CEOs. Being a narcissist can be quite powerful and helpful to people in the right unhealthy contexts that unfortunately a lot of our world thrives on. And so, these stages are really important that we integrate them, that we move through them in a healthy, meaningful way, because otherwise we end up in these stunted ways. We end up as an adult toddler, or maybe as a lot of fundamental people in fundamental faiths are, as a very conventional thinker. So we have people that can't think beyond their own country because they're so conventionally minded that they have to rally around people that look like me, that act like me, that live in the same place. And so they can't empathize with a person in another country. And so they then vote against whatever it might be, some sort of maybe vote for a war or vote against immigration or something that affects another person in another country that it's very hard for us to engage with. But when we're so fixated on America first, Britain first, whatever it might be, every country has these kind of thinkings. It's to do with stunted growth, and so it's really important that we healthily move through those stages. And I think that's a big part of what it is to deconstruct from your faith. You're starting to move away from conventional thinking and start to embrace this autonomy and individual thought and self-development and all of this amazing stuff. It's a really healthy, meaningful progression. But it's not the end either. And we keep moving forward. So that's the key, hopefully, for most people.
Yeah. Gosh, there's so many good things there.
I don't know if I answered your question. I just rambled about something for a while. This is my ADHD brain. I just grab something and then I forget what I'm talking about and keep going.
Okay. Remember, grief professional. I listen to rambling all day long. So you're safe here.
Wonderful.
One of the things that you brought up that it made me think about these beautiful efforts around decolonizing our faith practices. For those of us who become progressive Christians or choose to stay within some kind of religious framework, at least in America, there is a wild disconnection between a white person's experience within the church and a person of color's experience within the church. And the same is true even within spiral dynamics. I think about it often in how, because all psychological theories have flaws and miss the boat on some way. And I think in that context, the way I've been approaching spiral dynamics as just as a grief professional, has been to recognize too that there are always going to be exceptions to a hierarchy, to a framework. How do we continue to find what is useful and include that as we spiral upward, but recognize where we are excluding people that we want to include, to your point about like the community saying, oh, this person might normally be a social pariah, but because we believe the same book, they're now included, even though I internally, and this is going to like probably hit the nail on the head for people, it certainly was for me, people that were in my community that I still was worried about or had yellow flags about. I'm not going to go be in community just because we believe the same thing. We're still not actually in community. So it was really easy to walk away from people, or it was a very inauthentic engaging with individuals because of certain internal discriminations that we've created around people for many reasons. So how does decolonizing your faith, or anyone's, like, as that comes up, how do you encourage people to go broader, knowing of course you yourself are a white man or white
Absolutely.
presenting,
I'm,
right?
of
Like
course, the person to be talking about this.
Well, I'm calling you higher, Phil. I'm calling you into it
I know.
because it's powerful and
I'll go
important.
for it. I think it's interesting. If I was to do it again, my Spiral Dynamics series is very old, and I really hadn't begun to decolonize at all, really, at that point. Maybe starting to tiptoe into some of the ideas of it. And I think spiral dynamics, as far as, I mean, there's hundreds of psychological development models, and I think spiral dynamics is a very good one. It's based around values. So these different models are often based around different things. Personally, if I was to do it again today, I'd probably do it around Suzanne Cook-Greuter's ego development theory, which I think is a much more holistic, and it's much more inclusive, and it's really good work. You can download her full PDF of her paper on that. Just type in her name, Suzanne Cook-Greuter, ego development theory. And it's pretty accessible. It's you might have to read through it about 4 or 5 times, but print it out and highlight it as you go or something. It's really great. So I do think, you know, the nature of development, I mean, in and of itself is a very privileged thing. And so at the end of the day, growing up psychologically is privilege, right? So we talk about the toddler that doesn't get to do it and ends up becoming quite an unhealthy human adult because they had such a scarring upbringing. Maybe their parents were drug addicts and they weren't even feeding their kid. They weren't looking after their kid. They didn't get to go to school. They didn't get to socialize with other friends. Gosh, I watched a documentary with my wife recently where literally a 7-year-old kid living with her mom and dad who was literally watching them after they shot up on heroin to make sure they didn't die. And she knew how to call the police. And that was her childhood. And you're like, that kid is probably going to develop somewhat slower than the rest. Now, is she worse than anyone? Is she a worse human or not as good a human or something like that? No one would say yes to that, right? No one. But we would all recognize that she's had a much, much, much harder experience than most people. I can't even imagine. Now, if we look broadly at somewhere like America, much of the world realistically, but America's a great example. I'm assuming most of your audience are probably in America. I don't think many people, that's probably not true. I think many people today are aware that people of color, Black people, Indigenous people have had a much harder time existing on the United States of America soil, period, right? They have had a terrible go of it because white people came in and just ruined everything, took everything, owned everything, limited everyone's ability to progress, to grow, to be themselves. They took land from Indigenous people. They enslaved Black people. Like, it's so hard to describe just how much of a setback that is to someone, period. And we're talking hundreds of years, year on year on year compounding of oppression and of being set back. You know, you look in certain communities in America and you have almost no one getting to go to college. You have huge portions of communities going straight to prison, just straight from high school to prison, if they're lucky to have gone through all of high school. And that is massively correlated with race. And that often is then massively used in some sort of weird racist argument or something like that. But I think at the end of the day, what it says is that we have done a huge disservice to our fellow humans. And so I think when we look at something like psychological development, I think it's so key that we give everyone the best opportunity they can to develop, period. So we look at reparations so that, Black people can get into college and they get a foot up to do that. And people talk about, well, is it fair? Is it right? But this is really important work. And so we look at different things that we're trying to do. Some countries better than others, some communities better than others, some politicians better than ours, or mayors, or different people are trying to do this in different ways. And I am not an expert on how this should work, and I am not the person to be talking about how reparations should be working. I'm the person to be doing the reparations if I can. And so I'm not going to go into that, but I do think a big part of our conversation as to reparations does need to be, how do we facilitate making space for people to grow and develop? Right? You don't get to grow and develop if you're a single mom working 3 part-time jobs, not even getting enough hours to get healthcare and look after your kids, and you're struggling to make sure your kids get to school on time between all your work, and you're struggling to feed your kids. And there's so much going on. Do you know what you don't do in that period? You don't sit down and read some self-help books. You don't sit down and go, where are my holes in life? Where do I need to grow as a person? You don't get that opportunity. And so I think across the board, there are people that are hugely disadvantaged in life. They've been given a much worse foot up, and those people are disadvantaged in the ways that they'll be able to develop. And I think that's a huge statement. But it's so important when we talk about development. Development is never a measure of a human. I think this is something I try to hammer home constantly in my Spiral Dynamics series is, nobody in the world looks at like an old person, maybe someone that's 80 years old, and then looks at a teenager and goes, well, the old person's better than a teenager because they've developed more. Like a teenager is an old person. They're both human, right? And the toddler isn't worse than a teenager, right? Now, the toddler might not be able to do calculus, and maybe your teenager can, depending on how much they pay attention in school. But you wouldn't expect a toddler to do calculus. So there's no expectation of that. So I think it's really important that we don't set expectations beyond anyone's current place. Like, people are developed to the degree where they can be developed. I don't think anyone intentionally tries not to develop and grow. And so I think it's really important, especially when we look at things like, I think in deconstruction space, it's really interesting to look at this. People coming out of their faith communities, it's really easy to look backwards and look at this prior stage and demonize it and go, they're idiots. They don't believe, they just believe anything they're told. How can they believe a Bible or whatever? How do they believe a pastor says about that? So dumb. What, they voting like this? Oh, it's so, and they demonize this prior stage, and they forget that 6 months ago they were voting the same way. They were listening to the pastor. They weren't an idiot. They weren't foolish. They weren't reckless. They were really serious and committed and trying the very best they could. But it's how much they've grown up. And again, you wouldn't look at a toddler and go, what an idiot. They don't know what 24 divided by 3.2 is. What a foolish idiot. No, we just go, oh, they're a toddler. I'm not going to expect them to know what 1 + 1 is yet. Come back in 20 years and we can talk about like advanced math or something maybe, but I'm not going to expect that from anyone. So I think it's really complex when we look at psychological development. It's really easy to start looking at it as a hierarchy, but it's in some way is a hierarchy. It's a progression. It's a growth. Just like someone in their 60s is older than someone in their 50s. But not all hierarchies are measures of worth, of value, or anything like that. In fact, maybe very few, if any, are. So I don't know. I try not to speak in absolutes, but if I had an absolute, that might be one. That I don't think there are hierarchies we can create that dictate someone is more valuable than another. And so I think it's really careful we don't do that. I think it's really careful that, and I think it's really important that we look at people in these positions. So we look at people maybe communities and people groups that we have completely marginalized and hindered in their ability to develop and grow and to be fully human and who they are.
Yeah.
People like that don't get the opportunity to go off and be autonomous and start to think about, people, half the people in America don't think about someone in, Mongolia or Iraq because they are barely able to, make to the end of the day. They're
Right.
barely able to figure out how they're going to buy dinner tonight. Like
Right.
someone like that doesn't have the space to be all
Right.
inclusive, thinking about people on the other side of the world. They don't have the space to be thinking, oh, do I need to recycle this bottle right now so that we don't destroy the earth? They're not thinking 50, 100 years from now. They're thinking 10 minutes from now. And I think it's really important that we look at that and go, how do I help you? How do I facilitate your growth? And I think that's, if you have the privilege to be growing and to be developing and to have the space to be doing that incredibly important work, and decolonizing is a huge part of that. If you've got the space to be decolonizing, part of that should be thinking, how do I create space for those that have been colonized to do this work too? How do I create space for them to have the privilege to grow and expand and to develop? Because right now, generally speaking, broad strokes in a lot of parts of the world, development and growth and self-development and self-help and thinking about yourself and working on yourself is a very white middle-class opportunity. Like
Absolutely. Yeah.
outside of that, few people get to sit around and do that. It's just a matter of fact, and it's shit. It needs fixed. It needs changed.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
love that you brought up privilege. A friend of mine was putting together a grief retreat with a yoga instructor, and they ended up not following through because my friend, the grief professional, was saying this yoga professional really wants this to be like a 200 or a $2,000 to $2,500, weekend getaway retreat at this beautiful spa. And she's like, I want it to be $200 with scholarship opportunities. Plus they cover the cost of wherever camping. I want this to be accessible because she and I are very big on our grief work has to be accessible and attainable by all who want it. And I was like, I give you full permission to back out if you need to, because that elitist perspective has a very specific audience, which is fine, but she's the wrong partnership for your audience. And you don't want to alienate the people who trust you, where you've created safety for them by removing their access. And it's funny how, bringing up privilege, I talk about grief as a privilege all the time, because being able to cry, just to your point, is a privilege. Having a chance to sit back and give yourself 5 minutes, sometimes that too is a privilege. And even knowing that that is a meaningful act on your own behalf, having the knowledge and affirmation that that is an okay thing to do, is a very privileged perspective too. So thank you for stepping into a part of the conversation that was probably a little outside of your wheelhouse, but I think it's really crucial that we continue to make ourselves uncomfortable and bring our sense of understanding, but also our humility to those uncomfortable places. Because that really is, what grief does in any aspect that it manifests, whether it's through our loss of faith, our loss of community, our loss of relationships, loss of life in someone, loss of a future, especially. I think we fail to recognize that our humility is the one thing that we can rely on, because it's a very much a why not me approach to life. And that, I mean, I think that that's really quite restorative in and of itself, is this ability to say, well, why wouldn't this happen to me? Why wouldn't I be one to experience revelation of cognitive dissonance in my practices, and then recognize, oh my God, my gut and my values and my, sense of honor in the world are not going to allow me to continue to behave in this way.
No, it's really, really good. And I just, let me throw something on top of that as well, because I think this is interesting. The stage after conventional thinking, looking for safety and certainty and security. Now, many people in this world that are desperately just getting by don't even have the privilege of being at that stage. It's actually why they become part of communities like churches and things like that. And this is why you see things like churches and groups like that are so key to people that are in this tumultuous position. So one thing that someone looked into, which was really fascinating, is prisoners coming out of prison, and they looked at different types of churches that were like helping prisoners, and they thought that maybe the more developed, like later stage churches, ones that were more progressive and inclusive and had more autonomy and taught about, you know, like being inclusive and all these things, would have better success with prisoners. And actually it turned out they have much worse success than the churches that were teaching you absolute answers and just a way to live life and rules and regulations, but it would give you safety and certainty and security. And if you stop and think about it, people in prison do not have safety, certainty, and security, and they probably
or autonomy
would benefit from developing some rules and structure around their lives. Often that's what's landed them in prison, is they didn't have some structure and rules that the privilege to grow and develop and live within some frameworks that they get to choose and be a part of. And so it's really interesting that as we look at these stages, they do serve a purpose. And what's really interesting is that the stage that many people are deconstructing or moving into, this autonomous stage, if we're not careful, this stage can actually come right back full circle, and in its most unhealthy parts, because no stage is perfect. All stages has very unhealthy aspects and very healthy aspects. Its worst aspects are so autonomous, so self-centered, that it does start taking advantage of people. So it starts preying on people that are looking for absolute answers and gives them absolute answers for $3,000. And you know what? If your world is upside down, you'll scrape together $3,000.
Right.
Probably won't do much for you, and now you've just been robbed of $3,000. So it's really important, I think, for people to be aware of the negative parts of our development and our growth. So as we leave this communal thinking and this kind of group thinking and hive minds to become a bit more autonomous, it's not that we leave thinking about others and we don't leave that stuff. We just move into a new season of starting to develop new skills. But it's really important that we're aware that those new skills can become very warped and we could apply those in very unhealthy ways. And so, yeah, I think it's really, really interesting. And it's no surprise that you'll see this again and again in the deconstruction space. You'll see so many people in deconstruction space offering courses and programs and this and that, and they're all white, straight males, usually ex-pastors. But there's no shortage of people with black and white answers offering you the answers, because they see people that are vulnerable and scared and looking for some certainty, and they offer it with a big price tag, and they walk away very, very wealthy. And so, yeah, it's something to be aware of as we grow, that just because we're growing up doesn't mean that we're not susceptible to being just as unhealthy as some of the things that we've left. I often say that some of the people in deconstruction space are just as dangerous as the pastors they left. They maybe sound more inclusive, maybe they're a bit more inclusive, maybe they aren't extremely homophobic or transphobic or something. Maybe some healthy growth. But actually, undercurrent, they're actually very dangerous, and should be quite cautious about people like that have black and white answers and that are in that space. Anyway,
it's okay. So one last question in regards to people who have stepped away but are still manifesting values and behaviors that are not safe. How would you approach individuals who are kind of obsessed, and this sounds harsh, but kind of obsessed with like the internet warrior? I will take on all the proselytizing people because I'm doing the deconstruction community's work. Like literally the flip behavior of proselytizing, but fueling their own pain and frustration and anger. You know, a grief professional perspective, that is the complete opposite of meaningful. But there's some kind of meaning because we historically have not stood up for ourselves in that space. So how would you approach and support and encourage people who are like, oh, you know what, for the last 6 months, I've wasted my life yelling at strangers on the internet who are never going to change their mind, who are never going to apologize, who are going to hate me forever? How would you call them higher, but on their own behalf?
I think, I try to just work with individuals. So I don't tend to call out big groups of people or anything like that. I just sit with people. And so I think there's a space for that. And I think, certainly accountability needs to be had. And so people can face the consequences of their words and their actions. And I'm very pro helping people learn the hard way. But I think generally speaking, people need to learn the hard way. We don't learn very easily. We don't grow very easily. Generally speaking, we need to go around that roundabout 5 times before we learn the lesson. At least from my own experience, I had rarely learned something very easily. Even if I intellectually get it, I got to try it out a few times before it's happening. And so, I see this in my DMs over and over and over again. I talk with people and I could give them the answer they want or they need, but it's probably not the answer they need yet. Until they are really kind of coming there themselves, until they're putting it forward. Generally speaking, if I do anything, I ask questions to give them an opportunity to give me the right answer. And who am I to even know what the right answer? Maybe I don't know it. But if I maybe see, that they're maybe not in the most healthy place, they're doing stuff that's maybe not the most helpful for them. Even what that means is a hugely complex topic, because actually sometimes the most unhelpful thing on paper, and even with the data and the statistics, it's what you need to do to get it out your system to move on or whatever it is, and hopefully getting it out of your system doesn't harm anyone else. Of course, I'd step in if other people were being harmed. But generally speaking, someone's screaming on Instagram at strangers, and have a following of 1,000 people or something, they're probably not going to, crumble the world around them. So I think generally speaking, I just make space for people. I ask them questions, leave them, how's this working for you? Like, what do you think's next? It must be frustrating that they're not changing. What do you think they're thinking? What do you think they're feeling? What do you think? What do you remember what it was like to be like that? Like, what would have changed your mind? What did change your mind? You grew up. Did someone challenge you? Was it someone challenging you, asking the right questions? Oh, it was just you actually just kind of by osmosis happened to happen one day, or it's because your loved one died, or it's because you went through a divorce, or it's because you read this passage in the Bible. Oh, it wasn't anything to do with someone screaming at you online. Giving people space to process and to think and to ask questions of themselves, I think generally speaking is much, much better than trying to push people in a certain direction, because God, I have tried controlling people for a good chunk of my life. I was a Christian. I tried controlling people a lot. That's our thing. We tell people what to do, and when we don't do it, we get upset and we try and coerce them to do it. It never worked. It never worked. When it did work, everyone was miserable, and it only blew up a bit further down the line. It's just not healthy. It's not helpful. And now I understand psychological development. I think once you understand that people grow up through stages, you stop demonizing people at any stage. It's, do you know what? It's impossible for me to sit around with my in-laws as they say really unhealthy stuff. It makes me genuinely fume. Like, I'm so full of rage at times, and I have to just get up and leave the room and things. Occasionally we have a big fight or something, but generally speaking, if I can step out the room and sit down and go, okay, this is their worldview. This is how they were brought up. This is how they see the world. This is what they're scared of. This is what they're fearful of. This is why they're trying to make everyone believe like they do, because they're scared if what they believe is wrong, then will they lose their safety? They lose their certainty. They need to be certain that God is this God, not that God. And they need to be certain that they're part of the right group, and they need to protect their income or their whatever, or their, space, safe white space, or whatever it is. Right. And this doesn't, it could be your in-laws, it could be that pastor down the road, it can be the guy on the street yelling into a billboard, into a big megaphone, holding a billboard condemning abortions or homosexuals and things like that. And you're like, I'm going to step in because this is harming people. I'm going to, do my best to step in. But even in that space, it's important to remember this person is as developed as they are. It would be about as effective as me going to that toddler and going, so you're telling me that 2 + 2 is 4, but let me tell you, from a theoretical point, mathematically, 2 + 2 doesn't always equal 4. Theoretically, you're right. You go into like some sort of advanced mathematics kind of thing that no one's going to get, right? Even if you got postgrad in maths, maybe you're starting to engage in this stuff. Like, where's that going to go? Where's the right? It's like a teenager talking to their toddler and going, well, see, the thing is with algebra, right? What kind of end result is a teenager talking to a toddler about algebra going to be? They're not going to get it. They're not going to get it. And so you trying to get your racist uncle to not be racist over Thanksgiving dinner, wow, that sounds like a terrible way to torment myself over 2 hours. Now, I'm going to say, hey, I would really rather you didn't say racist things over the dinner. If you don't, you won't be invited back. So I can say, no, not on my watch. But I'm not going to go, hey, racist uncle, let me try and help you decolonize in the next 2 hours. It's not going to happen. My racist uncle is racist, and he is like worldview locked in, has met like two people that aren't him. Like it's like he is locked into a worldview. Now, hopefully over time, we can help him grow. We can ask questions. We can facilitate that growth. But that's not going to happen over Thanksgiving dinner. And it's not going to happen if you start yelling at him and calling him a racist, right? I mean, this is just not going to happen. So I think it's about giving people space. It's about asking questions. It's about making room. And it's about recognizing that people are where they are because that's the only place they can be right now. Yeah. And at best, we can facilitate them moving towards something better, hopefully.
That level of compassion goes a long way to preserve relationships as well, which I think mitigates additional grief events, of course, but it also gives us the opportunity to reflect and recognize, like you were saying, well, this is their worldview, and I was there once too, whether I want to admit it or not. And I don't want to let shame be the reason that I start refining my life. I want compassion and love and humility and affection to be the reason I start refining my life and moving forward. And so I love that you just identified, yes, when we can create that for people, and that doesn't mean you create it for people who have actively harmed you. Like there's no requirement on you for that ever. But in terms of family members or friends that you just have a falling out with because you believe differently, giving the opportunity for reconciliation as the outcome of a grief event in some way is really quite beautiful. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
Phil, we don't have much more time. So I'm curious, is there any one thing, I'll put everything in the notes, but is there one thing you just want to leave us with or celebrate that you're working on or share about?
I don't know. I think, this is... deconstruction is such a bizarre thing to go through for anyone, because it's unlike anything people have been through at this point in their life. And it's a deep grieving. Generally speaking, it is a death of community, death of friendships, death of some family members, death of your God. Even if you still believe in God going out the other end, you probably believe in a different God. And so that relationship, even the relationship with God, it's a death. Like, you have to grieve that process. And so I think the work that you're doing with grief is so important for people that go through deconstruction. And I do not see it as surprising that grief often sparks deconstruction as well. While you're grieving, you might as well grieve everything else as well.
Just wrap it all in. Let's go through it together.
Absolutely, right. But yeah, like if people are in the process of losing their faith, it's okay that this is hard. It's okay that this is really, really hard, because it's unprecedented. And even if you've done this before, it's hard, right? I mean, you tell anyone that's lost a loved one, losing another loved one isn't easier the next time. It might be, I don't know, this might be some components of navigating it that maybe become a bit easier or something, but I doubt that much of the emotions, the ups, the downs, the feelings, like that's grief, and grief has to be what it is. And yeah, I think, if you're going through deconstruction, if it's hard for you right now, check out the Deconstruction Network. It's a great place to go. It's about 6,000 people on there right now. And generally speaking, it's very English centric, because all the Instagram accounts and people that I know that have advertised it and things like that are all very English centric. And so if you're in, I don't know, China, you might not find as many people. There are a lot of people in China actually, but generally speaking, if you're in an English speaking country, you'll find a lot of people in your area. Like, this is the fastest growing spiritual movement in the Western world. There is no spiritual movement that's growing as fast. In America alone, people are leaving the church or deconstructing their faith at a rate of about 1% of America a year. That's an astonishing amount. It's absolutely astonishing amount of people. It's about 3.5 million people every year. And that's been over this last 14 years. It's not even, and actually, it's not over the last 14 years. That's up until 2000 and 15. So we're still waiting for the latest data on that because
Wow.
there's some lagging information. But yeah, it's a huge movement. And so the thing is, it can be one of the most isolating, lonely processes when you go out of that conventional space with lots of people in your life and all that different stuff, and you come out and you go into this new space. Generally speaking, people don't have a deconstruction church in your town. You know, if you stop being a Baptist and you become a Lutheran, you just type in Lutheran into Google Maps and you've got a new church to try, right? But if you type in deconstruction into Google Maps, there's not much in your area, right? You don't know. You maybe get a company that will knock your house down with a wrecking ball or something. But the truth is, if you knocked on 100 doors next, you got your inner Jehovah's Witness out and you just started knocking on doors, door by door, and said, hey, have you lost your faith? I doubt you would get more than 10, 15, 20 doors down before you found someone that says yes.
Yeah.
It's so prevalent, especially in America right now. And so it doesn't have to be something you do alone. Deconstruction Network, there's other communities out there. There's lots of communities online. Find me on Instagram. I'm Phil Drysdale, or even better, I just started a new account called the Deconstruction Network. It's a great space to connect. So yeah, connect with people online. There's so many great accounts. I'm sure you can point people in the right direction to many as well. Yeah, you don't have to do this alone. You really don't. It's hard and it's lonely, but there are people in this world for you.
Phil, thank you for taking time to just encourage our listeners, but also for being as honest and real as you are. I think you're making a huge difference. And I know at least 2 people who have appreciated the crap out of everything you say, even when it's just cheeky or hilarious, along with all the data too. So thank you so much.
Wonderful.
Thank you for listening to episode 55 of Restorative Grief. Deconstruction is an act as old as the earth itself, and yet something in this last generation has vilified the process as heretical, harmful, dangerous, and so on. I think of all the ways we could think about deconstruction. Phil's last point makes the most sense. We must allow ourselves to experience others and ourselves through expectations that are relevant to our current place in the world. Otherwise, we are piling on shame and continuing to labor under a mantle of life that is no longer ours to carry. If anything here resonated with you, I would strongly encourage you to follow Phil on Instagram, Twitter, through his website, or especially through joining his Patreon. The work he creates is entirely free and fully accessible, and it takes so much of his time, especially the new research arm of the Deconstruction Network. So if you can, I would love for you to honor that generosity with generosity of your own. And if this is your first time listening to Restorative Grief, thank you for choosing to join us and to stick it out through the end. Please take a moment to subscribe to the show, leave a review, tell me what you think, how I'm doing. There are plenty of links in the show notes to connect with me and learn more about what I do. And I would be honored to have you come follow on social media and connect with me and come along for the ride. And one last thing, as always, please remember, the only solution for grief is to do the work of grieving. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week.